Okay, hello. We're going to get this party started. I'm Tuhin Roy. I'm Senior Vice President of Digital Innovation at UMG's headquarters in Santa Monica. And I'm going to talk to you today about what UMG and a bit what the larger music industry ecosystem is doing to provide resources for entrepreneurs that want to build something in our space. So to set this up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we're doing it, why it's important from our perspective, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why we think this is a really exciting place to play just in terms of what might be possible in the future. And then we'll talk about the specifics of what we're providing and what others are providing. So first of all, why is UMG doing this? So a very short history of the music business over the last 20 years. In 1999, music business was riding high. We were selling CDs. Revenue was at an all-time peak. And in that year, a company called Napster launched, made music, all music, essentially free on the internet for those who wanted it, and started a transition for the business, which took essentially 16 or 17 years to play out. Very painful period. But over the last 3 or 4 years, the industry has found its footing, primarily driven by subscription music services, and things are going very well for the moment. We're cautiously optimistic. The issue has been that as this progression has sort of played out over the last 20 years, we've seen progressively less and less entrepreneurs and investors who are interested in the system. When I started working on a digital music company in 1999 in San Francisco, it was the height of the dot-com boom, and there was lots and lots of entrepreneurs who were interested in it, lots of investors who were putting money into the space. There was probably about 30 finance startups just in San Francisco doing something around music, and there was a lot of creativity and a lot of great products built. Most of those failed, and over a period of time, investors and entrepreneurs sort of slowly withdrew from the space. As the business turned around 3 or 4 years ago, as we saw that it was going to become the vast majority of our business going forward, the company became very committed to supporting and helping cultivate a very rich ecosystem of entrepreneurs and investors around our business. So that's why we're doing it. We think that it's critically important for us to do what we can, and particularly what we can uniquely do in our position as the largest recorded music company, to support lots of great creative minds in figuring out how this goes from here. Let me talk a little bit about why we think this is interesting, more from your perspective and from a philosophical perspective. So we live in an era of rapid technological, cultural, and social change. In the 1970s, this gentleman, Alvin Toffler, wrote a book called Future Shock. And he had a lot of interesting ideas in this book. I strongly recommend it if you've never heard of it, or if you haven't read it, or if you read it a long time ago, to read it again. But one of the things he identified is that over the last couple thousand years, what we've seen is a fairly slow rate of cultural and social and technological change up until a couple of hundred years ago. So if you were born in the 16th century, the world that you were born into looked a lot like the world that you died in. But with the manufacturing revolution in the late 1800s, change started to speed up. And if you lived in the 20th century, the world that you were likely to die in was going to be quite different, very different from the world you were born in. And that speed of rate of the rate of change is actually accelerating as time goes on. And the world we live in today, all of us who are alive, we can expect to live through very, very, very different social and cultural eras. So this was his theory, and it's playing out. And it's mostly being driven by things like Moore's Law, which dictates the speed of processing chips doubles every 18 months, and increasingly by machine learning and artificial intelligence, which allows computers to speed up what used to be a human process in tweaking algorithms. So we're seeing this play out. And we're seeing it play out in all areas in amazing ways. This is really an incredible moment in science. So, if you read the tech news, you know that multiple companies are focused on driving down the price of space travel. Elon Musk's company is very focused on being able to reuse rockets. A lot of the expense in launching things into space had to do with the fact that rockets were disposable, $100 million of sort of disposable hardware. He's bringing these things down. He's successfully landing them on barges in the middle of the ocean. Incredible things. Both private companies and NASA, other space administrations, have stated a firm commitment to have human beings on another planet in 15 years. That's going to happen in most of our lifetimes. After Hubble, NASA launched a satellite called the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite that's totally focused on finding new planets. So just our understanding of how big the cosmos is, where there might be habitable worlds, is all just accelerating at an incredible rate. Every science fiction movie that has long-distance space travel, you've got the hibernation pod. We're doing that. So NASA's and private companies are experimenting with ways to put people into induced comas and chill their bodies that would allow them to travel in essentially the state of suspended animation. Life sciences. My grandfather was a doctor, and I remember 20 or 30 years ago, he said he was very frustrated. He didn't feel that the state of the art of medicine was progressing very fast, but today it is. We're seeing this with the sequencing of the entire human genome, and we're entering an era where we can grow new organs that can be transplanted. The image on the bottom of that slide, which is 3 scans of a brain, comes from a story about some scientists who purchased 14 heads of recently slaughtered pigs, brought those heads back to the lab, extracted the brains, pumped into the brains a synthetic blood product, which, by the way, had specifically added to it a chemical which blocked neurotransmission because they were afraid these brains would come back to consciousness. And they would have probably come back to consciousness but for this chemical, because all the cells started to work. The theory is if this chemical is removed, these brains might actually recover some consciousness. So what does all this mean for the music industry? Fun, geeky, I'll make sure I'm on the right slide. So fun, geeky exploration, but what does it have to do with the music industry? Well, one of the things, we talked about this transition we've been through and the sort of future shock that the music industry experienced. We've come through it, it's great, and a lot of it's based on these subscription music products. But one of the things we're seeing is that there's sort of a reverse arms race going on, it seems to me at least, with these companies where they're all very similar. They compete on music recommendations. There's a lot of technology and creativity that goes into music recommendations, but it has proven over 20 years very hard to incrementally improve the quality of recommendations. They all let you search for whatever you want. They all have roughly the same catalogs. They all cost roughly the same amount. And because none of them are building new features in very quickly, I think that there's not a lot of incentivization for the innovation to come from these companies. I think it's going to have to come from the outside, from you, thinking about what's next. But, I mean, can we really believe, based on what we just talked about all the advances that are happening in space travel and life sciences and everywhere else, that somehow there's going to be a stasis around the way people consume music? That's obviously not the case. And we really believe that the way people consume music is going to change very rapidly. And our task as a collective here, us as a music company, you as an entrepreneur, you as an investor, is to continually think about how new technologies, as they arise, and how new consumer behaviors. One of the mega trends we talked about on a previous panel was this sense that particularly the younger 2 generations are not passive consumers anymore. They want to contribute their own creativity into the media that they're interacting with. How are all of these trends and new technologies going to affect the music experience going forward? We're very confident they're going to create opportunities to create businesses. And another nice little gem from Alvin Toffler's book is he said essentially that the illiterates of the next century, as when he was writing, are not the people who can't read and write, but the people who can't quickly learn, unlearn and relearn, because with this increasing rate of change, that's really becomes the core of surviving and doing well. So that's what we want to do together. So just quickly, while we really think that the surprises will come from you, they'll come out of garages everywhere in the world, that we do have a few ideas about some possible places that some interesting new businesses might come and areas of focus for them. So the first of all is just what we're talking about is a new generation of subscription services that are more social, around users interacting with each other, around users interacting with the content, and we say contributing their own creativity, that have more artist voice. You don't hear a lot of artist voice in these services. You don't hear artist interviews. You don't hear the artist talking about what they're interested in. You don't hear about what else the artist is doing other than making that track you like. Short UGC video services. I mean, this is obviously a massive trend that's going on. It is also driven by that same mega trend of users wanting to put their own face with the music that they love, dance to it, lip sync it, create an interesting video, create a story around it. So we think that there's lots more room for that. TikTok is the big name in that space, but there are emerging companies like Triller and Lemotive that we think are very exciting. We think there's a lot more to be done there. Music making apps for non-musicians. This has been also a trend that's progressing over 30 years, I would say. But when I was a professional producer, running a recording studio looked a lot like flying a 747. Today, there are apps for non-musicians to make music on a mobile device that are really creative and really give the user the sense of, not more than sense of, the power to express themselves in music without actually having any musical training. Those are getting better and better and better. Voice-based music services, so we're spending a lot of time asking ourselves, what does a music service look like? What does a music interaction consumption experience look like when there is no graphical interface? So one way to think about how that might change the experience is typically these very recommendation-based music services need some input from you. They need to know what songs you like, what genres you like, what mood you might be in, what activities you might be doing. But with a voice interface, there's totally different ways to capture you and what you might want or need in that moment. If I come home and say to a voice-activated speaker, play me some music, it might play me something very different than if I say, hey, play me some music, right? So all of this is to be created still. And then there are a whole set of businesses we think can be built around helping us do our job better. So fundamentally, our business is around being a great partner for recording artists that want to have really big careers. That requires us to identify artists and invest a lot of money in them. If you can help us figure out how to do that more efficiently, we think there's a significant business there. The recording industry spends multiple billions of dollars a year just signing artists. If there are ways to market artists more efficiently, if there are ways to help artists come into a more direct relationship with their fans, that's all interesting to us and we think fruitful for businesses. Okay, so we have to think about how can we uniquely help being the largest recorded music company. And so here are some ways that the company has invested resources and time and many, many executives from all over the world, contributing to these ways that we're engaging with the ecosystem. So the first is just bringing together great entrepreneurs and creatives to just have a little time to think about the future, oftentimes guided by a little bit of mentorship or education from us. We do that around hackathons. We do it around designathons. Here at Sónar, we're doing an innovation challenge, which is essentially a group of 5 people, very talented, creative people who have been brought together starting a month ago, worked remotely on some ideas, and then spent 2 or 3 days here very focused all around a table together, and they're going to present that later tonight if you're interested. But that's an example of just different models that we use to just give people a chance to dream in a very supported environment. Providing education. We do this in the context of things like hackathons. We also are looking at how we can do it more broadly, but we have a very complicated business. It's based around rights. Rights are incredibly complicated and get diffused into lots of different organizations. What you're thinking about doing, if it involves actually playing music for someone or including music in something, always will have a whole set of implications about what you need to do to go get that music licensed, and it's very hard to understand. In some ways, there's like no single human who really understands all of it, but we've got a lot of humans that understand a lot of it in our organization, and we can help with that. We, and I will talk about this in more detail, have created a whole network of accelerators around the world. We have internal accelerators that we're offering, and they've been very effective. We're making licenses for music available to startups on a very streamlined basis compared to the process that a bigger company like a Facebook or a Google has to go through with us. And then we're doing a lot of outreach to investors. So more detail on all of that. As a group of initiatives, this is designed to support every stage. So we realize that there's tremendous value in like one creative person saying, I'd love to do something around music. So we really want to provide support for that person at every stage as they go through this. So first of all, just examples of education. We did a program with our company in Mexico where we were doing a hackathon, but we required all of the developers and creatives who were going to participate in the hackathon to come into a full-day seminar. And executives in Universal Music Mexico who are involved in law, legal, marketing, promotion, artist discovery, all came and talked about what they were doing. It was a very long day, and it was a lot of information for the developers to absorb, and they all looked like they had been through a walk across the desert by the end of it. But actually, the products that they built over the next weekend were amazing and a lot better. One of our record label divisions, Capitol Records, whose headquarters are in this iconic building in Los Angeles, have launched an innovation center in the famous Capitol Studios, which are on the ground floor of that building, where they're doing all kinds of programs, some education related hackathons and a lot more, oftentimes bringing music creatives in at the same time as they bring technology creatives in to all create at the same time and to inspire each other. So we've done, I believe last year we did 11 or 12 hackathons across the world, across the whole organization. South by Southwest is always a big one. I think there were 30 teams that built products at South by Southwest this year. 28 of them did music stuff, and that was largely because we were there. We did a lunch and learn before it, and we were sort of out and forced to encourage entrepreneurs to work on stuff that we think is exciting. Capital Innovation Center, as I mentioned, has done a number of these that have been very successful. You see in the pictures there, Don was and other producers were there to help guide the thinking. And this is what we're doing here. Again, would love it if you come to the presentation. It's a great team, and they're working on some great ideas that we hope could turn into a business for them, could stimulate a business idea for someone else, could become a feature in a service. But ultimately, it all comes from them having the time and support to think about it. So, accelerators, and we really believe in this. There's lots of different types of accelerators. There's lots of debate at this point in history about what accelerators actually do. But we have seen with our own eyes and are firmly convinced that getting into the right accelerator for where you are as an entrepreneur or business can be very helpful. So first of all, one of our internal accelerators, the first internal accelerator we had is Abbey Road Red, and it's located in the historic Abbey Road studios where the Beatles and many others have recorded. And this is a program for companies that have launched and have some traction, but require a deep connection with the music industry. And essentially what it is a 6-month bear hug where we just attach at the hip and help that entrepreneur and that team navigate our company and make all the right connections for them and really, set a very significant intention to see that company advance. Again, the Capitol Records team doing a tremendous amount in the innovation space. Some of them are here, I'm sure. Can't quite see them. But we actually have 30 UMG executives who are at Sónar this year because we did a big internal conference here as well. So if you're interested in this, we can put you in touch. But they've done several of these. They have been successful in helping these companies get follow-on financing, refining their ideas. The Motown program is particularly interesting because this year is the 60th anniversary of the creation of Motown Records, and they're doing a program, I believe it's happening right now, in Detroit to accelerate some companies, and they're planning to expand their programming next year. Then in October of 2018, we launched what we call the UMG Accelerator Network, where we realized that while we're doing some internal accelerators, there's lots of great accelerators out in the world, but many of them don't understand music and don't know how to evaluate a music company that applies. And so we at least had the theory that there were a lot of startups that were looking for help, but they were kind of bouncing off these entry points because just like a lot of investors, all they know is that it's really complicated and that there's some big players in the space. So we started this network with a very simple model, which is that we would partner together with accelerators in key entrepreneurial markets around the world to just help them understand the applications that they're getting that are music related. And if they then choose to accept those companies, and we would make recommendations around that we would really lean in and help those companies and mentor. And so just to name a few of these partners, Lean Square is a great example. Lean Square is actually a large, roughly €500 million investment fund based in Belgium, but they took an interest in music fairly early on. They've invested in 6 or 7 digital music startups. They launched a series of programs that just happened a couple of weeks ago where they have a 10-day acceleration program specifically for music companies. They do an investor conference. They do a more general music tech conference. And they're an important example because they actually have a fund which will invest not only in companies out of their program, but is looking at everything in our network, certainly, and beyond. Sparks Labs is an amazing program. It started in Seoul, Korea. A bunch of successful entrepreneurs. They've now expanded. I think they have 12 or 14 accelerators in various places around Asia, some of them vertically focused. But they are certainly interested in music. They also have a capability to provide follow-on financing. 47 startups have gone through, and they have a number of them that are very much on the right track. China Accelerator is an acceleration arm of a large VC fund called SOSV that has over $500 million under management. Very active. I believe they do 2 cohorts of 10 to 20 companies a year. I visited their facility in Shanghai. It's just what you want to see. It's a buzzing hive of amazing ideas, many of them music or media related. And very international, so not necessarily focused on companies that are focused on China, but in this very robust entrepreneurial ecosystem in Shanghai. And across all of this network, we've now signed 9 partners into it. We've had 69 companies either in the programs or have come through the programs. And then those are some of the stats on the hackathons we've done and the number of prototypes that have been built. Interestingly, I think we see more variety of creative ideas in the hackathons because it's easier and faster and there's less cost to it. Obviously, the yield of things that are going to turn into companies is lower, but that's okay because it starts people thinking about the space, and maybe they decide that not to build and continue to invest in the thing they built at the hackathon, but they learn something there and go on to do something else. And this is just a little geographic layout of where the accelerators are at this point. None in Africa yet, none in South America. We're working on it. We are doing a big program with our Brazilian company in October, where essentially we're doing what we're doing here, where we're bringing together teams to do like a month of work on an idea, except we're going to do like 6 to 10 teams at that thing. And we've done stuff with our subsidiary in Mexico, so we are working in those areas, but don't have accelerator partners yet. And then finally, innovation licenses. I mean, this has been one of the stumbling blocks for entrepreneurs who are interested in building something in a space that requires a license. So it means that the application is actually going to use music within the application in one way or another. And traditionally, to get a license from a major record label has been a long process that requires a lot of sophistication and time and money. So we have tried to simplify that. There's still more work to do about it, but because we're both the largest recorded music company in the world and the second largest music publishing company in the world, if you look at the overlap of the millions of tracks in the recorded music catalog and the millions of tracks in the publishing catalog, you find that we actually control all the rights on actually a much smaller number of tracks than you might imagine. But it enables us to sort of issue was actually 2 licenses, but essentially a one-stop experience where a startup can walk out of the door with a license to actually go and do something without actually having to go to anyone else. Not that we discourage you from going to anyone else. And if the service is very small, less than 50,000 monthly active users, we actually have an API that we've built where you can stream the music directly from us. If you're a slightly larger company, up to 1 million monthly active users, and you have less than 1 million in revenue, then we have another license for that. In fact, you can start with the sub 50,000 user license, and you can actually just roll into the other one with no additional paperwork or very little paperwork. If you get up to those higher levels, then you're probably going to be going to one of our partners who are streaming providers like Napster and 7 Digital and others in other parts of the world to actually get the streams. You're going to have to pay something for that. But we have tried to simplify it as much as possible. Just a quick point, while I don't have a section here on APIs, we should. There are really a tremendous amount of resources available around recommendation technologies, around streaming technologies, around AI, around image recognition, around identification of songs that are uploaded. And in one of the presentations that someone gave to our internal conference, they were talking about like us being in an age of combinatorial innovation. And we think that that's actually, I mean, that's clearly true just in terms of the general market, in terms of being able to use AWS and an API of IBM Watson and something else to pull together a payment solution, to pull together an app. It's also true around music, where there's a lot of tools to combine into something new and interesting. And then finally, around investor engagement, 3-4 years ago, there would have been no slides here, or very few slides. But increasingly, there are funds that are focused on our space for startups at different stages. Raised in Space is a fund that happens to be right down the street from our office in LA. It was founded in partnership with Scooter Braun, who is a music manager. And it's looking to do investments in the 500K to 5 million space, so slightly later stage, but deep music industry experience, run by 2 executives who know the industry backwards and forwards. Marcy Ventures is an amazing joint venture between Jay-Z, yes, that Jay-Z, the president of his company, who's Jay Brown, and a Silicon Valley investor named Larry Marcus. They're looking to do things that are maybe even a little bit later stage, but they are an amazing team and listening to all ideas. Larry Marcus, who's the day-to-day venture partner there, was an early investor in Pandora, which is the main music internet radio service in the US. has been looking at music stuff literally from the beginning. So he's the guy who, can also kind of similar to us, like give amazing feedback on your idea. Techstars music is not something we're directly involved in, but we think is an important part of the ecosystem that we support through mentorship and is there and putting in. I mentioned it here rather than the Accelerator section because they actually make a fairly significant investment in the startups that they choose to accept. And plus, 8 Capital, who are actually here at this conference, is a fund that was founded by a bunch of very successful electronic music DJs, including Richie Houghton and John Acquaviva, is done about 10 investments in the space, has had somewhat of a focus on some hardware stuff, which is a little different category, but listen to all ideas and are very, very great, knowledgeable industry investors. So we're here to help. Christina, who is on our team, is right there. And you can email us if you have questions about this. You can grab us while we're here. And we'd love to engage with you. We wake up excited to do this every day. So that's all I have for the presentation. I've got a few minutes left, so I think we'll take a few questions if there are any. Yeah. Do we have microphones that we can? Here it comes.
Hello.
Hi.
This was very cool. I wanted to ask you, when you guys invest in these startups, do you do convertible notes or you do just buying equity right away, or how that works?
So, the form of the investment is always just specific to the situation, but any type of known traditional financing is something that we can do. Currently we have a fairly high threshold for making investments. The company has invested about $160 million in startups over the last 7 or 8 years. But as the business has gelled, we have been more selective about it. But we're capable of doing anything. Someone back there.
Hello. Hi. I'm just wondering how we can get access to some of these APIs you talked about and what the different ones available are currently.
Okay, so that's a question we can answer for you offline in more detail. It actually makes me realize we really need a document we can share with people around the APIs. Some of them are very public, like Spotify's API, and that you can just use off the shelf. But we can actually take care of this for you. So why don't you see Christina, and we'll try to put together a list of some of the API options.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Any others? You're going to let me off that easy? All right. Well, thank you very much. We're here and look forward to speaking with you.